Peter Hitchens is here with me from the Mail on Sunday. He knows about as much about what's coming out in it as I do, which is not very much. But what we do expect to happen is that he will probably reverse almost all of the tax cuts that were put in there. We're hearing that he is poised to announce that there will be an end to the energy price guarantee coming in the spring. In April, basically, the universal aspect of it will end, which means probably they'll somehow means test it, which they always said they couldn't do because that was too expensive to figure out, and it was easier just to give it to everybody, even though it's not really a cap, even though what she said about 2,500 being the most she would ever pay turned out not to be true. It's not hard. I don't know how I can keep up with all this stuff. Fortunately, I'm very agile and on my feet, because you need to be in this day and age. Literally anything could happen. Some people in the Tory party want Liz Truss out. Some people want her to stay. We spoke to Richard Graham just before the news. He said that this was going to be the right thing to do, this new policy, even though he didn't know what it was. So, anyway, stick with us. We will bring you everything as it comes, as it happens, and we will give you suitable analysis of it as well, because who better than to analyse the situation than the veteran of politics in this country, Mr. Peter Hitchens. Peter.
Morning.
I hope you don't mind me saying you didn't know what was going to come next.
Not at all. I don't
think anybody doesn't. The good thing about you and I is that we can admit that.
Yes.
You know, we're not frightened of admitting we don't know something, unlike many politicians who pretend that they do know and they support something until it becomes unsupportable, and then they don't support it anymore.
And some of them pretend they can be Prime Minister and they turn out not to be able to handle it.
I mean, plotters are all over the place. There's people plotting against Liz Truss. There's people plotting on behalf of Jeremy Hunt. There's people plotting on behalf of Rishi Sunak. There's people plotting against the plotters.
Yes, but what is all this for?
What is it going on?
Well, because the Conservative Party has lost any purpose. And this has finally become apparent. It has finally disappeared up its own...
it has, dodo-like.
What you would call it. And there it is. It's gone because it has for many years not had any purpose for existing. It's just been a vehicle for ambitious people.
Yes.
And I think Liz Truss exemplifies those ambitious people.
They've sort of reached the end of the cul-de-sac with her, haven't they?
I said at the weekend, she bought her policies and her ideas off eBay. They weren't the ideas she used to have. They just seemed to her to be the ones that would sell well at the time. And they didn't. She completely misread her market, and indeed she completely misread the world markets and the bond markets and the currency markets as we now see. So we have a chance. Well, first of all, she fired her Chancellor for doing what she told him to, which is an unusual reason for firing somebody.
It is.
And now she's got a new Chancellor who tells her what to do, as far as I can see. But she still has to pretend to be Prime Minister until they can find somebody else who they can all agree on, somebody who nobody dislikes enough to stop from becoming Prime Minister. It's not they're not going to pick the new Prime Minister on the basis that everybody wants him, but that not very many people don't want him, which is why I'm guessing that Jeremy Hunt is rising in the stakes on this matter, because he doesn't actually have that many enemies. Not many friends,
I'm surprised
but not many enemies.
He has a lot of enemies in the country, I would say. A lot of people don't trust him. A lot of people feel that he is not a man who has any particular convictions. He's a steward. He's a sort of administrator. He's the kind of guy you put in charge of the council because everybody else is on strike.
But we are calling in the administrators, aren't we, at the moment?
Well, somebody actually said that he had the look, when he was being interviewed the other day, of a man who'd been called into a sort of second division football club that had just gone into bankruptcy. And he was going to be
second division,
and he was going to
might be lower down than that, actually.
Well, maybe so. Probably Championship, as they call it now, League 3. But certainly he doesn't exude what I would call international statesman-like behaviour.
No, but since his soon-to-be predecessor, if we're right about this, not only does not exude it, but actually repels it.
Yes.
It's not really a terrible disadvantage, is it? It's just trying to find somebody who isn't as bad.
Right. I suppose more importantly...
Negative characteristics are the top...
More importantly, though, are we now living in a time, and you might say we always have been, where policy, financial policy in particular, fiscal policy, is dictated by the markets? Because
it has to be. There was never any particular doubt about that. Everybody who deals with, I remember Clinton's people complaining years ago how the real rulers of the world were the bond markets, and that's the case. Every government knows it has to borrow money. It depends on that, and if the interest rates get too high, then it's had it. So there are limits. What Liz Truss didn't seem to realise, or quasi saying, was that those limits were really real and did not allow her to just play around. I long, of course, as everybody who pays tax does, to pay less tax, but I've never had any illusions that the only way to reduce the tax burden is to spend less money. We're a tremendously high-spending government, and we're a country which for some years been persuaded that it can have European-style welfare state and social benefits and high spending projects at the same time as having American levels of tax. Can't do it.
No.
I mean, I have to say, I'm outraged at the behaviour of the President of the United States in actually publicly criticising our government, because it's none of our business.
Right.
But alas, he's right.
Well, this is the problem, though, because I was talking to my sister last night about life in general, and she has been a currency trader, a bond trader, all sorts of things all throughout the last 30 or odd years, and she was saying that there were times in pre-kind of what you would call computer times, because everything now is sort of fixed in, and the price fixes are all in. The computers have got stops on them, so that there can't be any collapses. But the currencies would sometimes move 10 cents in a day. That you would have dollar-yen conversations where basically the currencies would ratchet up and ratchet back down again, and nothing actually changed around the world.
I'm pretty certain that's because the people on the markets know how to get them to go up and down. They can make a few thousand.
Yeah, and they made money on the way up
every time it does.
Exactly.
That's just sort of book.
But what I'm saying is that the dreaded graph that was put out when the pound was slumping against the dollar, which meant it was actually going down by like 1 cent. The graph was constructed in such a way that the drop looked like that, when it should have actually looked like that.
Maybe. I do think that there was something quite serious that happened over that budget. I think people looked at it and they thought, these guys don't have a clue.
Yeah.
And it wasn't so much that they thought the policies were wrong or right, but that the people who were implementing them didn't know what they were doing, and I think that did engender.
And so it has now proved, because we've now got a situation where Liz Truss has basically reversed practically everything that she wanted to do. But the reason she wanted to do it was she said that was the way to get growth. So now, presumably, she doesn't want to get growth, even though they keep now saying we're going to get growth by doing the complete opposite of what was suggested.
Well, the problem is growth is difficult in the kind of economy we decided to have, and it's much more difficult in the kind of economy we decided to have during the COVID panic, when the magic money tree was stripped of every last leaf on its branches, and now they keep running back to the magic money tree, and it's still not producing any more leaves. It's gone, so they'll have to plant a new one. But the only result of that will be more and more inflation, and higher borrowing, and higher taxes to pay for it.
Yes.
So unless they can snap out of that cycle, which would involve an almost total change in so many profound policies, and could not be done overnight. If you wanted to really change the course of this country, it would be a long, slow business, whichever route you took. And you're not going to be able, with one budget. As I said at the weekend, trying to revive the British economy with these measures is like giving a hobbling pensioner a handful of amphetamines, an electric shock, and a can of Red Bull, and expecting him to enter the Olympics.
Well, we've now got some breaking news. The Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, has announced the government will scrap plans to reduce the basic rate of income tax from 20% to 19% in April of next year. So there goes that one. A move that had been forecast would cost the Exchequer almost £5.3 billion. The government is also going to ditch plans for new VAT-free shopping for international tourists. I never knew where that one came from. That was the most ridiculous of all. Mr. Hunt says that they will hear more from his plan coming very shortly. The point is this. I mean, the VAT-free shopping for international tourists was bonkers to me. Everybody that I know who was in business in this country said what they should do is reduce the VAT in general. Like make it 15% or make it even 10%, and that will stimulate growth all over the place.
Somebody's been lobbying them, and they bought it. I think the thing to watch for here is what he says about welfare payments and whether they're going to keep those, as it were, index linked, or whether.
Well, most of the forecasts seem to be around the only thing staying is the national insurance reversal, which they will stick with. But almost everything else is out the window.
I think that's been enacted. It would be really quite complicated to go back on it, as I understand it.
Yeah, I think so, because that's been in since July, hasn't it, more or less? But I mean, it is a ridiculously crazy way to run a government, because even if Jeremy Hunt remains as Chancellor and doesn't become Prime Minister, as you say he might, then somebody else comes in, she disappears, and it becomes just a very horrible mark in Tory's history.
Let's discuss politics rather than the political gossip of who's in, who's up, and who's down, who's out. Let's discuss what government ought to be doing and why they're in this mess, and why they've completely run out of ideas. Because this is really the point. Both the major political parties and the Liberal Democrats have all accepted a set of beliefs, which, amongst other things, commit them to incredibly expensive forms of government, which inevitably involve large amounts of borrowing and high levels of taxation. To come into the middle of this and proclaim, oh, I'm going to take you back to the levels of taxation of 1928 or whatever it was, it's completely unrealistic. You have to examine the whole basis. This is why economics used to be called political economy. It's actually about deciding what you're going to raise money in tax for, and
how are you going to spend it,
and how you're going to continue to pay for it, and how you're going to, while doing so, maintain an economy that will enable people and businesses to pay those taxes. And at the moment, they can't. They find it really difficult. This kind of thing can put a company out of business.
And many companies have gone out of business.
And people out of work.
And there were people, you yourself included, predicting that this moment would come, and nobody believed you.
Well, I think perhaps they knew, but they thought they probably wouldn't be around when it came. And this is what generally happens with
well, I was of the opinion...
They do disastrous things. The disaster happens. By then, they're enjoying their retirement.
I was of the opinion at the time, and you might remember that I said this, I thought there was such a mammoth investment in what they were doing. It was such a huge amount of money that surely to heavens they must have had a plan to deal with that, and maybe they just invent some more money.
This is the mistake that people make. That they think that because politicians are good at appearing to be competent and in charge and level-headed and intelligent, that they really are. But actually they've all been schooled these days by very clever public relations men and acting tutors and voice tutors to look as if they're more intelligent and more serious.
And obviously Liz Truss was off that day.
Well, I mean, I think it's still... I still can't... I remember back when she posed in that tank, with the tortoise on her head, that ridiculous photograph when people said she was pretending to be Margaret Thatcher. She actually genuinely thinks. It began to dawn. She genuinely thinks that she is like Margaret Thatcher. Well, she wasn't. No, she couldn't have been. And it's I don't know whether you saw Dominic Lawson's column in the Sunday Times yesterday, saying that, well, maybe she actually was a party sleeper from the start.
Well, it would seem that way.
It's a more plausible explanation than some of the others.
It certainly is. A confirmation, by the way, that the energy bill help that all households have got will only last until April. Jeremy Hunt says he will announce a review to look at a new approach to target support at those who are worst off. So, I mean, apart from anything else, Peter, I mean, a lot of people would have benefited from that who were less well off, wouldn't they?
Well, yes, they would. But though, in fact, the real problem with the tax system at the moment, and the one which is increasingly scandalous, is the way that the supposed higher rate now kicks in lower and lower and lower because they don't raise it in line with inflation, and that is really punishing middle class people. But yeah, sure, it would have been a wider benefit, and I think it was stuck in to the emergency budget to offset the outrage at the concessions to the rich. But since most of those have gone, I suppose they might as well get rid of that as well. They're not really in a position to give money away because they haven't got any money. And that is basically the realisation. Sorry, we made a terrible mistake.
But one of the other things that they've done is not only have they not given money away, but they've now upped the corporation tax, which they said they weren't going to do.
Well, yeah, that is a really serious...
And that is a serious problem.
It's a serious blow, and it's a curious thing for a Conservative government to be doing.
Yes, it really is. Because that's not that's not cancelling a tax cut. That is actually leaving the tax where it was and putting it up by 6%.
It's very bad news for a lot of businesses. And I think the result of it will be people losing their jobs because you'll simply saying to business, we're taking more of your money away. Well, okay. But that means that it's just simply going to be much more expensive to run a business, and that was I think a pretty widely desired and applauded move, and it's gone.
Yeah. Well, this is the thing. I mean, business needs as much help as it can get because the energy prices have affected business in a way much worse than it has affected you and I and/or domestic households.
So giving tax concessions to individuals, people look at them and say, well, these people are doing fine as it is, and they can cope with a bit less money. But if you take money from business, you do actually have an effect on the business, and businesses employ people. They also have to set prices in the market for their goods, and those prices have to go up.
Yeah.
So
because everything is going up.
It's quite different from people say, oh, well, you should tax business, as if business was just a milch cow that could just have stuff sucked out of it. If you tax business heavily, you discourage business.
Yeah, because this country is run by small businesses. It's not run by multinationals. It's not run by global organisations. I was hearing a story the other day that I think Mini, which is now owned by I think BMW. Is moving one of its manufacturing bases out of Britain and into China purely and simply because the energy costs of running the factory are simply, you know, unsustainable.
Well, this is what multinationals do. They don't have any national loyalty. They move rationally to wherever they can operate most profitably.
No, but if it's
why wouldn't they?
But it's because of specifically because of the cost of the energy. Because in not every country the energy is cheaper. You know,
no, China of course makes a lot of its energy with coal-fired power stations.
Absolutely right.
Which
absolutely right.
We used to have those, and we blew them up.
And I'm told Tesla was manufacturing batteries in Germany. Is now moving that to Texas because, again, the energy price of manufacture in Germany is too high.
Well, German energy is one of the great tragedies of modern times. The much praised Angela Merkel pretty much destroyed Germany's energy basis.
Yeah. Well, she not only destroyed the energy, she destroyed the entire country. She's now no longer looked at, and this is a woman who was praised during the COVID outbreak initially because she was a scientist and obviously very clever.
It was one of those unbearable things. I kept hearing people saying what a marvellous chancellor she was. And I'm like, why?
Yeah.
Eventually, of course, it comes around and people say, oh, Angela Merkel, she was terrible. But I said so at the time. But what good does it do?
You must get tired of saying that.
I do.
I said so at the time. Let's have a listen now and a watch of the new Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt.
Good morning. A central responsibility for any government is to do what's necessary for economic stability. This is vital for businesses making long-term investment decisions and for families concerned about their jobs, their mortgages and the cost of living. No government can control markets, but every government can give certainty about the sustainability of public finances. And that is one of the many factors that influence how markets behave. And for that reason, although the Prime Minister and I are both committed to cutting corporation tax, on Friday she listened to concerns about the mini-budget and confirmed we will not proceed with the cut to corporation tax announced. The Government has today decided to make further changes to the mini-budget and to reduce unhelpful speculation about what they are. We've decided to announce these ahead of the medium-term fiscal plan, which happens in 2 weeks. I'll give a detailed statement to Parliament this afternoon and answer questions from MPs. But because these decisions are market sensitive, I've agreed with the Speaker the need to give an early, brief summary of the changes, which are all designed to provide confidence and stability. Firstly, we will reverse almost all the tax measures announced in the growth plan 3 weeks ago that have not started parliamentary legislation. So whilst we will continue with the abolition of the health and social care levy and stamp duty changes, we will no longer be proceeding with the cut to dividend tax rates, the reversal of off-payroll working reforms introduced in 2017 and 2021, the new VAT-free shopping scheme for non-UK visitors, or the freeze on alcohol duty rates. Secondly, the Government's current plan is to cut the basic rate of income tax to 19% from April 2023. It is a deeply held Conservative value, a value that I share, that people should keep more of the money they earn. But at a time when markets are rightly demanding commitment to sustainable public finances, it is not right to borrow to fund this tax cut. So I've decided that the basic rate of income tax will remain at 20%, and it will do so indefinitely until economic circumstances allow for it to be cut. Taken together with the decision not to cut corporation tax and restoring the top rate of income tax, the measures I've announced today will raise every year around £32 billion. Finally, the biggest single expense in the growth plan was the energy price guarantee. This is a landmark policy supporting millions of people through a difficult winter. And today I want to confirm that the support we are providing between now and April next year will not change. But beyond that, the Prime Minister and I have agreed it would not be responsible to continue exposing public finances to unlimited volatility in international gas prices. So I'm announcing today a Treasury-led review into how we support energy bills beyond April next year. The objective is to design a new approach that will cost the taxpayer significantly less than planned, whilst ensuring enough support for those in need. Any support for businesses will be targeted to those most affected, and the new approach will better incentivise energy efficiency. The most important objective for our country right now is stability. Governments cannot eliminate volatility in markets, but they can play their part, and we will do so, because instability affects the prices of things in shops, the cost of mortgages, and the values of pensions. There will be more difficult decisions, I'm afraid, on both tax and spending, as we deliver our commitment to get debt falling as a share of the economy over the medium term. All departments will need to redouble their efforts to find savings, and some areas of spending will need to be cut. But as I promised at the weekend, our priority in making the difficult decisions that lie ahead will always be the most vulnerable. And I remain extremely confident about the UK's long-term economic prospects as we deliver our mission to go for growth. But growth requires confidence and stability, and the United Kingdom will always pay its way. This government will therefore take whatever tough decisions are necessary to do so. Thank you.
Chancellor Jeremy Hunt there taking the tough decisions, saying that pretty much everything that was announced in the mini-budget is now going to be reversed. Peter Hitchens is here. What do you make of that?
Well, apart from anything else, it's the most extraordinary slap in the face for the continuing Prime Minister. Yeah. Within a few days, her principal policies have been cancelled, and they've been cancelled on a television screen by somebody else apart from her, who she's appointed, having sacked the person who used to be her Chancellor. And he's now plainly telling her what to do. The other fascinating thing about it is this, that this ought to be announced in Parliament, and in normal circumstances it would have been. And as Mr Hunt has admitted, he had a special permission from the Speaker to announce it now, because it was more important that it should be announced to the markets than to Parliament, and therefore we get an interesting nod to the idea that many have said for some time, which is that the markets have more influence over government policy than Parliament does. Right. It's a fascinating moment in our history. It takes one back a bit to the ERM times, I think, to see a level of, I won't say panic, but a level of concern as great as this.
And surely before...
And there's more to come. Yeah. The other vital thing about that statement, he was absolutely blunt. There's more and worse to come. This isn't by any means the end of it.
And basically everything has gone, hasn't it? I mean, even up into and including the IR35 stuff, which is of much interest to, obviously, an awful lot of people in our business.
Yes. No, it's just gone. It's the whole thing has been cancelled, as the word goes these days. And the humiliation for the government and for the Prime Minister is considerable, but there you are.
And in no other business could the person who had come up with all of that, i.e. Liz Truss, would that person still be in charge?
Well, time moves in fast and slow in politics. I don't know how quickly developments will now take place. Yeah. But the thing that I think restrains the Tory party from replacing her is trying to find somebody who they can agree on. Yeah.
And also, maybe
if they could find that, then I think she would be gone.
And maybe the markets might have a view. You know, perhaps they'd like to ask the markets who they'd like to see as Prime Minister.
Well, the market obviously does have a view, and the main view is that her policies have to go. That's more important than whether she goes or not. And the presence of Jeremy Hunt, who's plainly doing the Treasury's bidding, because he's not an economics expert himself. He's never been a Treasury person before. Basically, the Treasury is now in charge, and Liz Truss is not, and that will reassure the markets to the extent that they can be reassured, and also will the promise of more to come. So that job is done. The economic side comes first. The political side is slightly more tricky and comes later. And of course, there is the ridiculous position of a political party which keeps changing its leader, which it cannot now avoid doing again.
Calamity, isn't it? It's a calamity, is it not?
Well, yes, in a way, but then, of course, the other point is this. Our politics have for a long time been troubled by what are basically dead political parties which stand for nothing, and this is a direct consequence of this, that they're this flailing around for wild, impractical policies to try and make up for the fact they have no real ones has led to this. It might conceivably lead to a very badly needed reconstitution of British politics, in which we need two new parties, basically, to replace the two dead ones, which stand for nothing and don't represent the people who vote for them.
Very, very interesting. Peter, thank you very much indeed.
My pleasure.
Peter Hitchens there with his take on what the Chancellor has just said.